The readings chosen for this feast of the Virgin Martyr Cecilia are also used in the context of virginal consecration. The leading of a soul into the desert is a concept very dear to the monastic spirit. Why? Because there the Lord promises to speak to her heart. The desert favours contact with the heart. Why? Because it is deserted. Eremos, it's a place where there is not complication, and complication is the enemy of the soul. And so, if we want to meet the quiet one, we need to be in quiet mode ourselves. That is important. The Gospel also is important, especially at the end of this liturgical year, for it warns us that we must stay awake, for we do not know either the day or the hour. And it places before our gaze that frightening scene of the door being found closed. One doesn't know the proportion of souls who, even at this moment in time, are leaving this planet not prepared and actually positively unprepared, in a state of long refusal. The risk is actually there that by their own earlier choice they have themselves closed off the entrance to what they were made for. This very morning, actually, in Lectio Divina, quietly before the Blessed Sacrament, I opened the Scriptures and this verse came. It was what the Lord himself said about the son of perdition, about Judas. He said it would have been better for that man had he not been born. That actually is quite a frightening statement. The Lord knew all, he knew what he meant, he knew what he was saying. And we know from exorcism that the soul of that betrayer was lost, because he's appeared in exorcism on the tempter's side as a human demon. And it's quite frightening because he was actually ordained not only to the priesthood but to the episcopate himself at the Last Supper. He was one of the 12, and therefore we know that the risk is there, that what can actually lose even what is given and imprinted on the soul, that is baptism and confirmation, which leave a seal forever on the soul, and also orders, holy orders. It doesn't mean that it's automatic. In fact, I've been reading recently about a certain amount of priests who when they leave the priesthood are solicited by people who are into satanic rituals, because they know that to have a full black mass they have to have a Catholic priest who has the priesthood but has left the ministry and still has the possibility of consecrating. They're keen on having these black masses. They themselves know it is only a Catholic priest who can provide it. So it's quite frightening. The demon knows all. He knows the power of the Catholic Church. He knows the real presence. He's not fooled, for instance, when false hosts are presented for black rituals, because every month a certain amount has to disappear and be made available for their black rituals, but they have to be consecrated, and the demon knows which are and which aren't. So it's very real, the battle that we're engaged in. In the early centuries, of which we think now with these early martyrs, the persecution was overt and from without. There were at least 3 major points of persecution. Firstly, the great wave under Nero, where we lost many martyrs in a short time, as well as the princes themselves, Peter and Paul. Those Roman martyrs, many of them in awful circumstances, put as lamps to light the torches in Nero's gardens, sewn in sacks with animals and all the rest of it, as though they were trying to imagine the worst possible punishment for man. And then Decius, the mid-200s, 250, 251, around there, a lot of martyrs in that very powerful anti-Christian wave of persecution. The last great one was Diocletian, beginning of the 300s. Many, many martyrs came from that period, 303, 304. There was, even actually, after the beginnings of Christianization of the Roman Empire, a small period of persecution again. You know, the way that there was Julian the Apostate, who thought that Rome was losing on the military and political front because it had abandoned the ancient gods that had protected Rome, and so he got back to the old pagan gods, and of course it didn't work. And he died with these words on his lips: "You have conquered, Galilean." So that was the last of all, even though that was after the beginnings of Christianity on the level of the empire. And then, of course, we have the situation where grace was free to operate. That carried on. We have then Satan again coming to the attack in a different way, with, it would seem, an apparition of himself under the form of the Archangel Gabriel to Muhammad, who immediately after receiving this strange experience thought he was himself possessed, but was flattered when a member of his family said, "You're not possessed, you're a prophet of the Most High," and on he went without anyone to be able to warn him of the danger of illusion. If one has no spiritual director, one is easy prey. So one can see how clever the demon is, because there's an old saying in Latin, "Is fecit cui prodest." He did it to whom it is an advantage. So if the end is the destruction of Christianity, and if the means are very powerful and efficacious, one asks, who did it? Later then, we have in time the way that Satan attacked the means of grace, the Church of God, through the wave of the French Revolution and what went on underground, the beginnings of Freemasonry, which came to the fore again at the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s, with Freemasonry taking political control of one of the most Catholic parts of the world, France. And we know there that in the Grand Orient, in Paris, the demon himself would appear in human form to the most initiated, telling them step by step how to go about the destruction of the Catholic Church. In Italy too, it was directly anti-Catholic. So this was then persecution still from without. Then we know that there was, from within the Freemasonry, and therefore linked again with satanic intelligence, the realization that persecution from without was not sufficient, because the structure of the Catholic Church was so perfect that it could not be demolished from without. There was only one real way to do it. It was from within. And so there was this ploy planned already in the mid-1920s to infiltrate the Catholic Church and to destroy it from within. We know it from documents that have leaked out. It was the case. And when it came to what was to be a springtime of the Catholic Church, the new Pentecost, the celebration of the Second Vatican Council, we know that satanic forces were very much interested in this as a possible means of making things go wrong, because of the new openness that was coming in, which could go either way, and they knew it perfectly well. So when we see in our time certain patterns emerging, the question then comes to the surface. Who is working? It's important to be aware of these things, because people are just tendentially led by what they see and what they hear as the norm. We need to be discerning. All that is new is not necessarily good. It can be mingled with other factors and other forces. Because often what actually happens is this: the demon is so clever that he knows that the way to convince the simple and the pious is to introduce things in a language which is familiar to them, and to underscore points which are true by people who have power of conviction, but to introduce with it a message attached which is contaminated. It's rather like a virus going round the computer world. And this is the bit that they like to get in and keep in. And it sticks and destroys. A little bit of error. So we need the gift of discernment, the spiritual gift of sapientia, which is actually linked with sapere, which is actually linked with tasting. Something is insipid and it loses its taste. The taste of what is from God and what is contaminated. It comes through study, it comes also through prayer. The Lord gives us, as it were, a sixth sense. What is not of Him, we pick it up. In common parlance we say, we can smell a rat. Let's cultivate that and not just glibly accept all that's said, all that happens, because not necessarily is it the best. With regard to the feast that we celebrate now, it can be linked with that, because one specific area would be the question of what is around as modern, and therefore with it, and therefore to be encouraged. Music. We know the power of music. The demons know the power of music. And we know, again from certain things that have leaked out, that the demons already had for quite a while the project to use music as the means to destroy the souls of the young. He's keen on getting the young. And quite a bit of study has been done on what is actually going on in the popular music culture. It has got considerably darker than it was when we were adolescents. When we were growing up at an early stage, there was already a big change in the air with regard to popular music, but it was actually, say what you like, music still. It had to be created, it had to have a combination of melody and sense in the words, and quite a few of those composers, modern though they were producing things which could be sung with interest. And there was harmony also using classical chords within modern beat. It was still sort of music. Very shortly, that actually evolved, and quickly. The big change came when it became more electronic, with the introduction of artificial means of creating sounds, and synthesizers eliminated to some extent the need for a full drum set and created automatic modes very quickly. It made a cheap sort of sound effect. It also took away to some extent human talent, and technicity took the place of actually giftedness. One had to be a good technician. It's not the same concept. And that also comes through in the quality or absence thereof of the words, if one listens what is being sung or even chanted. Then there is the directly satanic coming in, and it would seem, if one looks carefully and listens, that there is a fairly high proportion of groups involved with things which are actually directly satanic. I've heard recently actually of a case of a well-known present group of pop stars, a band, who are known to perform satanic rituals. I'm not allowed to divulge, But this is the kind of thing that's going on, and if they have a great success in a short time, the question then is asked, does that mean that they've sold their soul so as to get it? So if that's the case, and if that's now what's drawing young people by the thousand, well, that means that Satan knows how to preach. And if one looks at young people as they walk down the street, they are unable to live with the sound of silence. They have to be plugged in by earphones to something. What is that something? It's not going to be pacifying. And there are also subliminal messages coming in, cleverly put, where actually sometimes there is a message to adore Satan, and worse. So, when the Church tries its best to give directives on what is worthy of God in its cult, and when on this day we think of the plethora of great minds that have given their all to this, right through the centuries, and especially in the West actually, because of its openness, we think of the Counter-Reformation and the great characters like Palestrina and so on, which were harnessed to produce the best possible for God. And when one looks also across the Christian world at the great beauty that does exist in many a celebration, not only in ancient and classical cult form, like the choirs in Bavaria and Austria, still used, but also in the renewal that has come, both in the charismatic renewal and in These and the like, one sees authentic, elevating beauty when it's well done for the Lord, and not an end in itself. Then one sees that there is consolation in the language of music, and music is the language of beauty. Already perceived actually in pre-Christian times, because the word music means the art of the muses, Musikertechnik. Then we see that when the ancients saw that there was a link between order, numbers, harmony, and for them the god Apollo and music, that there were these, as it were, muses, spirits, inviting poetic and musical composition, they saw that it was numinous, it was somehow elevating and linked with the Godhead and had an effect on the soul. So too, the Christian experience is the same. Our ancestors have had access to mystical experiences, as it were, by being exposed to high points of glory, even at parish level. Many a good parish had very good music on a Sunday at the main celebration. Now, the question poses itself. Again, he did it to whom it serves. If there is a destruction of beauty in the human experience on a Sunday, is that necessarily directly from the Holy Spirit, or is it some other sinister force, again from within, attacking to get at the soul? So if people don't get elevation there, where will they go? We know where they'll go, because man needs something outside the banal. So we look for it in the wrong place. And people get experience from other sectors now, often mingled with Christianity, but New Age and all that goes with it is something satisfying the need for the beyond, but in a mysteriously sinister way. I finish. We need to be aware of the link between beauty and God. All beauty is a reflection of God, and Pope Benedict had a whole teaching about the way of beauty as a sixth way of proving the existence of God. He referred to it as the via pulchritudinis, the way of beauty. That when we see reflections of the divine beauty, we are seeing precisely something which is emanating from a higher power, and also reflecting the nature of that higher power. The way we dress, the way we keep our home, the way we place the altar in a place which is honourable and honouring the God of gods and Lord of lords, they're all physical emanations of order and beauty. So nothing should be allowed in church which is not of that order. The shoddy has no place in the house of God. I conclude, let us not either in our soul tolerate the shoddy, or even actually in our bearing and our clothes. Cleanliness is close to godliness, and we need order in all sectors of our life. And what we like in music indicates also something of what we are.